Now that we're past the Bufflin news that we hope doesn't become news, and I mean that. I hope he decides to stick around. But I can understand if he decides, okay, that's enough. That being said, moving along to other news of the day, Mikko Rantanen. So Rantanen and Laine share the same agent, Ben Hankinson. Ben Hankinson also was the agent for Brock Besser, who just signed in Vancouver. And he's Rantanen's now going to be training with Bern as well. So Rantanen and Laine together. The difference being Rantanen isn't saying anything in an interview, and it's interesting that they all have the same agent, isn't it? And I'm not saying that to throw any kind of shade at Ben Hankinson, but clearly he has a strategy to this. He talked about the extension with Brock Besser and how he sat down with Jim and they just got it done. And they were both kind of ticked off at the end of the process. He said they both kind of swore at each other and neither one of them were happy with the contract. And he said that's how you know it was probably a good contract. That's what needs to happen with Rantanen. That's what needs to happen with Laine, Connor, all of these guys who are still out there. You need to lock a GM and an agent in a room and hash it out. And so we'll see what happens. But the idea that Rantanen is going to be off training in Switzerland too, that's a sign they're not close. If they were close, I would think he'd be training somewhere closer than Switzerland. CBA extension talks. So we had the good news that we're still going to have hockey next year, and there's some long-term peace to be had, and it may be longer term than 3 years. Because I saw that right away, like, oh, we'll just have another lockout in 3 years. People are going to be so upset. They're still talking. The NHL and the NHLPA are still talking, and I've heard. I know after the players decided not to opt out, there are some pundits up here who are former NHL players, and you could see they were concerned that because the players hadn't pulled the trigger, that they'd lost all their leverage, and they're counting on Bettman and the NHL to come through on their word. I don't know. So this is kind of what I've been talking about when it came to the CBA negotiations over the last while. That there's a different feeling with this group that's negotiating with the NHL, and there's a different feeling from the NHL side of it as well, where the NHL, it feels like, really has a partnership with the players and they want that to continue. And on the players' side, they don't have that same mistrust that players who dealt with the 04-05 lockout and the 2012-2013 and if you look far enough back, you can look back to 94-95 where we had another shortened season due to a lockout. Those players that were angry from that have moved on. But when you see them being interviewed on any of the sports channels and they talk about it, you can see that mistrust that they have towards Bettman and the NHL still there. But the owners and the players want to announce an extension. Not just that they're in agreement they won't back out, but they want to extend it. And they're talking about a long-term extension before the All-Star break. And what's being said is it may be a lot sooner than that. That's what Frank Saravelli was reporting on TSN, that it may be a lot sooner than that. And the restricted free agents issue has come up at these meetings, changing the way restricted free agency works, talking about maybe 4-year entry-level contracts, arbitration after the entry-level contract, so after that 3rd year, you're eligible for arbitration, so we don't have these lockouts, and something that I said would make a lot of sense, bumping up the deadline. December 1st is just too late. Bump up the deadline to the first day of the regular season, or another one apparently they've been talking about is like October 15th. So 2 weeks into the season is the longest you can hold out, or you're not playing that year. So that makes a lot of sense, and I hope the NHL does change the way the RFA thing works, because again, the NHL does get a reputation for being a reactionary league, but they're either going to be a reactionary league or they're going to be psychic. And they can't have known that all of these RFAs were just going to go, yeah, no, we're not signing this summer. And that we would have this drama continue all summer. So the NHL, much like with the controversies around certain goals and certain playoff incidents last spring, reacted and changed the rules accordingly. They're looking at changing the way that restricted free agency works. I would like to see a situation where the players do have a little bit more control. Because right now, other than doing what these RFAs like Rantanen are doing, they have no control over anything. This is the only thing they have. The only arrow in their quiver is, well, I'll just hold out. They don't have the freedom that the unrestricted free agents have. And I can understand people saying, well, they're just coming out of an entry-level contract. They shouldn't have complete freedom. I agree. But the idea that they're just going to have a gun put to their head and they're going to be told, hey, we've got the rights to you. Here's a 6-year deal. If you won't take it, forget you. You're gone. So, we'll see if things change coming out of these meetings. But they're still meeting. The fact that they're still meeting, the fact there's still a sense of urgency on both sides in this shows that we may finally be looking at an NHL that's going to stop shooting itself in the foot, which would be great. Noteworthy, the Edmonton Oilers, Anton Berdasov has earned himself a tryout with the team, so a professional tryout. And we'll see how Edmonton's roster comes together. I have to say, watching them last night against Vancouver, and again, it's not their full roster. First up, Evan Bouchard looked pretty darn good last night, so he looks to me like he's ready to run a blue line at least. And I say run a blue line like meaning power play point man. So that's important. That should hopefully change things for the Oilers because I'm tired of seeing them at or near the bottom of the league. But there are a lot of intriguing names in their camp, and just add another one while we're at it. A lot of unknowns, a lot of European players coming over, and a lot of guys, too, that are looking for bounce-back years. It's going to be a very interesting year for the Oilers overall. 8 games on the schedule tonight. I almost said 6. It's 8 games on the schedule tonight. Ottawa's at home against Toronto. Montreal's playing Florida in Bathurst, New Brunswick. So that's kind of fun. And, at this time of year, first we had the game in St. John's yesterday, now we've got the game in New Brunswick. It is an absolute shame that they don't have the population in the Maritimes to support an NHL team. I have always thought, even when I was a kid, why isn't there a team in Halifax? Why isn't there a team in New Brunswick? Why isn't, just for me as a Canadian kid thinking, these are Canadian cities, why don't we at least have something there? But again, it's a population thing as much as anything else. I will say this, if they ever actually had a hockey team in the Maritimes, they would become like the Green Bay Packers of the NHL. That ultimate small market feel to that team, and they would immediately be very, very popular. I know it's not going to happen, but it'd be a very, very popular team if it ever did. You could only have one in the Maritimes, so they could fight it out amongst themselves. New Jersey's in against the Rangers tonight. St. Louis is playing Washington. Tampa's looking for revenge on the Carolina Hurricanes. I'm just kidding. It's preseason, so it really doesn't matter. Minnesota's playing Winnipeg. Detroit is playing against Chicago again, so we'll get reminded of that Norris Division matchup we used to have back in the 80s, the teams that fought each other in the Central in the early 2000s, and now they're not in the same conference, so we'll get reminded of that again. And San Jose's in against Calgary, which was a blood feud last season. We'll see if that happens again this year. If they're fighting it out for first place, I'm going to go ahead and say yes. If they're fighting it out for a playoff spot, yes. I'm going to go ahead and say I'm leaning towards Calgary and San Jose having quite a rivalry this year as well. It was funny too, because last night, I want to close out with this, because this is kind of a funny note that I heard last night listening to or watching the Colorado Vegas game. It was the Colorado announcers. It was on Altitude Network, and he was talking about Calgary and how there's a lot of disappointment in Calgary, and that the Calgary Flames, had that setback against Colorado. And he said what's interesting is that they're essentially the same team as they were last year that got eliminated in the first round. But what he actually said was they're essentially the same team. And I thought, oh, that's a good word. That completely changes the meaning of that entire sentence, that the Flames are essentially the same team. And honestly, that's a great tagline. They might want to use that on posters. They might want to throw that up on billboards. They're essentially the same Flames. I thought that was really funny, and I know what he was trying to say. That's why I said he meant essentially. But that was one of those things where, and we'll get into that as the season goes along, when I'm watching games and I hear announcers say things and I go, oh, that's good. That's fantastic. And I anticipate having a lot of those moments this year as well. So there you go. Let me know which game you're looking forward to tonight, how excited you're getting as we're now up to September 18th. We're roughly 2 weeks from the start of the season. And yeah, it's on its way. And then we'll get into all the stats videos and all that other wonderful stuff as the season rolls along. And hopefully the CBA extension's announced pretty quick. And Rantanen is a Colorado Avalanche team member on opening night. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.